The college football season is full of controversy across the national landscape with NIL and the transfer portal and a college football playoff proposal that's being battled and bandied about among the conferences. But unfortunately, Iowa has a separate issue that it's dealing with right now that we will get into here on Hawkeyes Live. So welcome in, everyone. Leave your comments and your questions in the live chat, and we will get to them. And this show only is possible because of Corey Brada from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Corey, how you doing?
Mark, I'm doing all right. I wish we were talking about a different subject today, but this is what's on the minds of people, and I know it's just been a very divisive subject over the last couple of days, and we can get into it. I'm not going to summarize what's happened. If people are unfamiliar with the controversy involving the Cedar Rapids Gazette and Kirk Ferentz and this advisory committee, Google it. You'll find a couple different information sources, and it's just unfortunate because, again, another distraction in the off season about a very important issue. But again, we can talk about it, but people are really up in arms about it, and I can understand why.
I don't think there's any question that any reasonable, fair-minded person who is concerned about people wants players on a football team to be able to have advocates and to be able to have a voice and to be able to have an avenue to air their concerns. And then to understand that these young men have signed to play for a coach and a coaching staff in an institution, not just talking about Iowa, but anywhere in which they're being entrusted during their very late formative years in their life. And it's an extended family to a certain extent, and to have their concerns heard and responded to if necessary. And I will just say, based on my limited knowledge of the situation, but I certainly kept up with the issues that were reported and discussed during the leading into the 2020 season, and now with this advisory committee that was reported to be dissolved, and that wasn't necessarily, or is not necessarily, the case, and not the best way and the most accurate way to term Kirk Ferentz's decision and his next step in dealing with this and developing this committee. That, number one, it's unfortunate because anytime that there's an inaccuracy by the media, and then that inaccuracy is discovered, and even if it's retracted, corrected, the damage is still done. So there's still going to be people out there that have a negative response to this, even if they hear the retraction, or maybe they miss it and they're not understanding of where we stand currently on this. And then also, I just think that the evaluation of how this has been being handled by Kirk we have yet to be at that place where we can correctly evaluate it, because he has promised to restructure and move on with a committee, a revamped committee, and we will see if he holds true to that.
Yeah, that's fair. And I tweeted out after the initial article, and I'm not going to name names specifically, but I think everybody knows at this point that the initial article was published by a couple different writers for the Cedar Rapids Gazette. And the Gazette has been around for forever, it seems like. And for a long time, it's been viewed as a very credible Iowa media source. And by the way, I don't always do this, but I do want to put this out there. If you're listening to this show right now, and I know we're just getting into this subject, do us a favor, because it is the off season, and sometimes, as you know, maybe interest in football and whatnot does wane. This is a very serious subject, so please be respectful in the chat. I know there's been a lot of attacking of Iowa media people. I don't want that here, and I know, Mark, you feel the same way. This is your channel, and I just want to put that out there because I understand people being upset, but it's not necessary to attack, especially on this platform. But the Cedar Rapids Gazette came out with an article, as you know, Mark, that the headline was basically that Kirk Ferentz was dissolving this diversity committee, which, if anybody doesn't know, that inclusion diversity committee had been put in place after the offseason controversy last summer. And it was made up of former players, African-American players, that were going to be giving advice to Kirk Ferentz and the staff and helping the university, because there were some issues. I mean, anybody who denies there weren't some issues is probably just too much of a homer. And there were issues. I understand that some people felt like Chris Doyle was made to be the scapegoat. I understand where they're coming from on that. I also understand people who say that maybe more was made out of it than should have been. But when you have as many players come forward as Iowa did, it's something that obviously needs to be taken seriously. So I don't want to sound like I'm downplaying it. The fact of the matter is, the Gazette article did specify in the article, if you read the article, that Kirk Ferentz was going to be looking at how to proceed with this committee moving forward. The problem is when you put a headline out there, and Mark, you've worked the media before, you've been a formal part of the media. When you put a headline out there, and there's a fine line between wanting clicks and putting an article headline that's going to generate clicks and generate interest, and being misleading with your headline. And I think that's where people are upset right now. They feel like they were misled because nothing was mentioned in the Gazette headline about the fact that Kirk Ferentz did state in his email to the committee that although the committee was being dissolved as it currently stood, it wasn't going to be dissolved permanently. And Kirk was planning on, according to the email, he is planning on revamping it with different different members. And I want to say this too: the Des Moines Register did release an article, or actually just a copy of an email that was sent out to players yesterday and their parents that basically stated Kirk Ferentz basically saying that there has been a lot of misinformation out there, but the reason why a number of these media members were relieved of their duties is because they were asked to be relieved of their duties. And so it had to be revamped. Now, I will say this. I'm not trying to stick up for anybody here, but by Kirk Ferentz using the word dissolved in his initial email to the committee, that's asking for trouble, right? Can we agree with that, Mark? Just by using that term, I'm not saying he deserves for this ended up being a huge story on ESPN.com, because it was, but that's probably not the word you want to use, and the Gazette ran with it.
I believe both can be true, that he could have phrased it more in a way that it would not lead to misrepresenting what he's about to do, but also the Register was not forthright in its reporting. The Gazette. I'm sorry.
Yep. Yeah. No, I think that's clear. And then again, there was nothing I want to make this clear. There was nothing in the Gazette article that I looked at and said that's just vehemently false. But the problem is, again, people, there is that fine line between making something appealing for someone to click on and read and making it what we'd call clickbait. And certainly when you're dealing with a very sensitive issue like race relations, Mark, I think that line has to be is that much more important to respect. So perhaps that was, I'm not attacking anybody, but perhaps that line was sort of treaded on a bit.
Do you believe that Ferentz sends out those type of communications without them being filtered or reviewed by anyone?
That's a good question. I mean, he's the head football coach. This is not the initial email, I believe, was sent out to the advisory committee, which isn't made up of more than, I want to say, like 30 people. Maybe it's not even that big. Maybe that's way too big. I don't know, but it's not a lot of people. So I wouldn't necessarily think, especially given the fact that these are former players, that Kirk, he probably doesn't do that. The disappointing thing too is, and I know the Gazette reported on this, but David Porter, former Iowa offensive lineman who was the committee chair at the time, has been very outspoken against Ferentz in the last few days. And that's unfortunate because David Porter was a good offensive lineman for Iowa. Again, he was the committee chair. I think he was respected heading into this, and I'm not saying he doesn't deserve respect now, but it did come out that he had sent out a text message to his fellow committee members following the Citrus Bowl, and said in the text that he believed Kirk Ferentz and Brian Ferentz needed to be fired or needed to retire. I should say, let me rephrase that. That Kirk Ferentz needed to retire and that Brian Ferentz needed to be let go. And he did state on the radio yesterday, AM station KCJJ in Eastern Iowa, he did state that he felt like Kirk would be willing to fall on his own sword for Brian Ferentz, and for that reason, he didn't feel like Iowa could go forward. It wasn't a comment based on football performance; it was a comment based on the offseason and the inclusion issues that we're talking about. So that's unfortunate too. That's been a part of all of this.
I think it also needs to be considered that actions speak louder than words, and the initial controversy that came to light in the summer of 2020, correct?
Right.
Okay. So here we are, more than a year and a half later, and we've got a transfer portal where student athletes are jumping into the transfer portal for all sorts of reasons, both good and bad, or good and flimsy, I should say. And there's not been a huge departure of athletes from the Iowa football team. So I think that's to Kirk's credit, and may, in a sense, not confirm what Mr. Long is demanding.
Well, here is the biggest issue I have with the and again, this was all
Porter. I'm sorry.
Yeah, this was all started by Porter, and let's just be clear that the one issue I have with Porter, and especially with what he said on the radio yesterday, was that he was asked, had Iowa been following the committee's suggestions on how to make Black student athletes feel more comfortable? And the answer was yes, they had been doing that. So I don't know if, it did sound like potentially sour grapes, because the claim from Porter was made that Kirk Ferentz and the staff did not want to meet with the advisory committee during the bye week because, according to Porter, Ferentz wanted to push it off till December so that these coaches could have time with their families during the bye week. I understand both sides of it. I understand Porter, who says, no, this is important enough. We need to do this now. We're not waiting 2 months. This is important. I understand Kirk also thinking, okay, it's important, but we need to get our staff members time with their family. That's also important. So I understand there's two sides of this. But if that's, again, we don't know what's going on. We don't know all the details here, what's been going on behind closed doors between the committee and between Kirk Ferentz and the rest of the coaching staff. But if that's the reason why Porter is calling for Kirk to be fired, that's inappropriate, in my opinion. That's inappropriate. Unless there's a bunch of allegations that we're not aware of, that's inappropriate for him to come out and say, oh, it has nothing to do with the offense. Or because, I mean, you and Mark, I've been critical of Kirk Ferentz in this offense, but have you ever heard me say that Kirk Ferentz needs to be fired or needs to retire right now? I've never said that.
And exactly what you just stated was the exact statement that I was going to make about if that in and of itself caused Porter to make that demand, then yes, that's ridiculous.
So again, don't know if that's the case or not, but I will say this: the bottom line is it's bad optics for Iowa. I heard somebody rip me on social media on Sunday. Oh, you tweeted that far too soon. You got to hear both sides. I don't care what the sides are. It's unfortunate because it's bad optics for Kirk Ferentz because of the fact that now it's in the national media. It's on ESPN.com. It doesn't look good, whether it's rightful or not.
That person is probably not understanding of what optics means.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly what I said.
They're trying to make a distinction between they're trying to say, you haven't vetted this out to understand the story. No, it had nothing to do with that. It had everything to do with what are the optics? Sight. What does this look like to
Correct.
The average person out there? It's not a positive.
And let's be clear, the advisory committee's job, and Porter, Porter is one member of the advisory committee. Okay, so he's one member, and I understand when he came forward and this information was leaked, and he's talking with KCJJ. I happen to know, and this isn't a secret, Jordan Lomax being one, some of these advisory members were not happy that Porter came out and said these things. And Jordan Lomax, who was a black safety who played under Kirk Ferentz in the past 6 to 7 years, came out on social media and ripped at least one Iowa member and said, you should have spoken to us as other committee members before publishing this stuff, because we don't agree with what David had to say about Kirk Ferentz needing to step down. We don't agree with that. Now, again, they're going to go unnamed, but some of these other media members claimed that they had tried to reach out to these committee members and they had refused to talk to them. So some of it's he said, she said. The bottom line is, like you just got done saying, Mark, it doesn't look good from the outside. ESPN publishes an article that was very similar in headline to what the Gazette published. And I don't know if I didn't even look at it. I don't know if it was the Associated Press, if it was the
That's
AP
where I saw it.
Okay, so that's what it is.
That's where I saw the story. Yeah.
So it's everywhere. And I think we can be clear that the Associated Press is not going to come out and retract what they published, because technically what they wrote was true, because Ferentz is the one that used the word dissolve. But the problem is the headline is misleading. And, but you're right. You said it at the outset. Kirk does have a responsibility now to make sure that this committee gets rebuilt, and he does it promptly, because it is an important issue. Anybody that says that making everybody feel comfortable at Iowa isn't important, then I don't know what to say to you, because it is important that everybody feel like they're part of a family and part of a team. They feel comfortable there.
I just pulled up the story that I first saw in reviewing, as I typically do a number of times during the day, to make sure I'm not missing any college football news. And I see this story on the ESPN college football front page. And so this story broke on the 15th, which would have been Saturday, correct?
I saw it Sunday. I think it was Sunday morning. I saw it Sunday morning.
Okay. This is dated the 16th. I'm sorry. So this is dated the 16th, because I just wanted to make sure that this is the first ESPN article. So ESPN even deviated from the term that Kirk Ferentz used, dissolved, and the title reads, Kirk Ferentz disbands diversity group, says decision unrelated to leader's suggestion to move on from Iowa coach.
Now, does it say later in the article? Because I'm assuming, so ESPN creates their own headline and then copies the AP article, correct? Is that what they did on this?
I believe so. Let's see.
So, but again, if I think I did see that. They do acknowledge in the article that he is planning on.
Absolutely, they did.
Right.
Yes, because this is where I got all of my information, and they make that clear.
Yeah.
Again, unfortunately for Kirk, he should have known that. You hear the word dissolve. What does dissolve mean? If you dissolve something, it's no longer exists. It's.
With that being said, though, Mark, you're right. Maybe that was a poor choice of words on the part of Kirk Ferentz. That doesn't absolve media from being forthright and not being deceptive with a headline. That to me, that is, and I haven't worked in that capacity before. We help operate a local news site here in Ames. I've worked AM, FM radio. I've not ever worked at that capacity with that big of a voice. So I'm not acknowledging that, but there is some sort of honor that has to be associated with being a media member at whatever capacity. And you have to understand that, again, with a sensitive issue, especially, that line that is there, and it's a fine line, it has to be respected. And I think perhaps it wasn't. And so people are very defensive of Kirk Ferentz, and I understand where they're coming from. People who are mad at the Gazette for allowing this to be published, believing that certain reporters have a vendetta against Kirk Ferentz. I'm not going to go that far because I don't know these people personally, but certainly it looks like it's to generate clicks. And that's not a good look for the Gazette.
Yeah, in my view, there's no question that the weight of the issue lies on the media far more than it does Kirk Ferentz. He could have stated it differently, but even in the way in which it's stated, it's easy to see, read, and understand that the plan is to ultimately restructure it. What timetable, I don't know, but in the committee as it currently is constructed and reconstructed and revamp it and continue on with it. Now, I know that if I was in the Iowa athletic department, is certainly the administration going on up beyond that. I would be having a meeting, and I'm sure they already have, with Kirk to say, let's get moving on this restructuring. And so if we can show that we're good to our word and we are going to restructure this committee, then all should be well. And of course, we know better than that. The damage has been done to a certain extent, but at least we can move on and show that we are good for our word.
But I will say this, Mark, you brought it up earlier in the show already, but the fact of the matter is Iowa has not had some big exit of black players. Even during the controversy in 2020, Iowa had one decommit, okay? Jordan Olatakun, who I don't even know where he ended up. I think maybe he's at an FBS school, I think. But the reports from, and now you can make the argument that the current players won't feel comfortable really being honest until they leave because, pushback. I get that. I'm not claiming that would ever happen, but you could understand that argument. But the bottom line is Porter, the committee chair, who outwardly has said now that he wants Kirk Ferentz gone, he wants Brian Ferentz gone, he wants the staff overturned. He even admitted that the coaching staff and Kirk had implemented the suggestions of the committee. That's been done. The current players have endorsed a cultural change. Not to say it's done, not to say that there's not work to be done, because there clearly is. I don't think you ever stop working at an issue like this because it is an issue that clearly we have in this world, and we can only do so much individually, but it needs to be worked at. So those things have been done. It's been those are on the record of having been done. So my one big thing here, and this would be the only criticism I have right now for anybody on the athletic staff, and that would be Gary Barta, because, and I'm not saying that Gary is responsible for all of this. I'm not trying to imply that, but it just seems like this kind of thing happens a lot, Mark. The lack of PR awareness. You'll recall several years ago, if you're an Iowa fan, a Fran McCaffrey extension that was signed during the middle of a really bad season, one of Fran's two worst seasons of his tenure here. That didn't make much sense. You have the field hockey controversy. I don't know if you remember that story, Mark, but boy, was that 10 years ago or better? With and lawsuits out the wazoo. The lawsuit associated with the field hockey coach that was let go for what she claimed was discrimination, and of course won the lawsuit. Of course, there was controversy as to whether it was a mistake on Gary Barta's part not recording some of what he believed was evidence to terminate her. But there's just all these different things that it just doesn't seem like. And now, of course, the university is facing a different lawsuit as it relates to some of the claims during 2020. I just don't understand why we can't seem to get our PR skills down pat. And everybody tells me Gary Barta is a tremendous fundraiser. Well, to announce the extension for Kirk Ferentz, and for the record, Kirk, in his email to the advisory committee, I believe it was in the email, I know it was reported that he had made this change, made the decision. The decision had been made by Kirk, maybe not announced yet, but it was made by Kirk in November to revamp the committee. But that was reported that it was made in December. You would think that Gary Barta would be aware of that, wouldn't you, Mark? Wouldn't Gary Barta be aware of that by January? That the committee, the committee that was made because of all the issues a year and a half ago was being revamped? I would think he'd be aware of that. So you would think that we would be able to time if you're planning on extending your coach till 29, you'd think you'd be able to make that announcement at the proper time, not like 4 or 5 days before this. I mean, again, I understand the Gazette had this story for probably about a week, but it just seems like this kind of PR debacle happens over and over and over again. And I have some sympathy for Kirk Ferentz in all this, because I don't think it was fair on his part that he's being perceived this way. Again, I'm not there within the program. I have no idea the extent of the issues that still need to be resolved. But just going by the evidence we have, which are the email to the committee initially to disband, or to not to disband, but to revamp, and then the email to the parents, which was sent out by Kirk Ferentz this week, and then of course the media follow up. I do have some sympathy for Kirk Ferentz in all of this.
I do as well. It underlines how important it is to message correctly. Yes, he could have done a better job. However, he should not have to endure the type of public scrutiny and media irresponsibility based on not using the best of words. But still, let's not, at least in my reading of the statement, let's not mistake that with, even though it could have been stated more effectively, it was still clear what he stated.
Yeah, and again, I want to just make this clear. Had Kirk Ferentz actually dissolved the committee, that would have been a very bad move. And not just from an outside perspective. It's a bad move when you have issues that have been brought to your attention that need to be solved. I mean, I know that's like the third time I've said that in the past half hour, but the issues were apparent. There were black players that were complaining about this in 2020, and those issues again. I know some have made the claim that the lawsuit that's facing the university is based upon a money grab, and a lot of them are players that I think all of them are players that never made it at the next level. I understand that perspective. You can have that, but there are players that brought it up that were in the NFL and succeeding. So it's an issue that I'm not questioning needed to be addressed, and continues need to be addressed. But that doesn't mean that you just throw anything out there to make Kirk Ferentz look bad if he's making steps in the right direction. It's just unfortunate. And I hate seeing the divisiveness on Twitter, because it's just, what a waste of time and energy it's all about semantics. This has all come down to semantics. That's what I tweeted about yesterday. It's just, and yet it's become an absolute firestorm, people making hateful comments towards other people. And, it's just unfortunate. I know we probably want to talk about other stuff, Mark, but do you have anything to add to this before we move on?
Well, just basically to outline what you just stated, which I'm completely on board with and support 100%, that we have a situation where there were issues. To what degree, we don't know, but to your point, valid issues amongst a number of players, past and present. Those concerns, I don't want to say were addressed, but there was a response to it, to start addressing those issues, to put something in place, to hear and to respond and to take action. And then we have a coach who makes a decision based on needing time for his staff and their families, and still continues to be, by all accounts, committed to developing this committee, just wants to restructure it. And so we have, because of that, and then attacks made and misinformation, miscommunication, and representation of what happened, people then needlessly and probably in most cases ignorantly attacking each other and attacking him. And
and I will say this, something I left out too, is that one of Porter's claims was that a simple question had been presented to the coaching staff. In summary, basically, how are you helping the athletic department be more diverse and inclusive? And Kirk Ferentz had come to that meeting with an answer to the question. Others did not, and that upset Porter. And I understand that. If it was one question about a very serious issue, you're telling me you can't come up with an answer. And I'm not denouncing the fact that Porter was upset that Ferentz wanted to push it back till December. That's his right. He feels like it was an important issue, which it is. Perhaps that supersedes. I mean, how hard is it to have a Zoom meeting for 30 minutes, Mark, during a bye week? So I understand that perspective of it. I don't have a problem with that. But as we've stated before, to generalize it and say that he needs to be relieved of his duties and all, did Kirk Ferentz have a choice at that point, Mark? As this diversity committee is here to help the university, help Kirk Ferentz, and he even said that in his letter to the parents this week. The committee is there to help Kirk Ferentz to be a better person and to help the program, help the student athletes feel more comfortable. And Porter, I think you can argue he probably went a little bit too far by saying that the only pathway forward is to relieve Kirk of his duties. How do you continue with Porter as the chair, Mark, when you're when he wants you and your son gone? I mean, I don't know how you can continue.
We're in a culture of reading headlines, and we'll never know how many people that are involved in this from a periphery standpoint that are arguing about it only read headlines. Because I got to say, my response to this was, I read the headline. It was already in my mind. What is he doing? Why would he do that? Because when it comes to social matters in particular and others, I have kind of two thoughts about it. One is that there is generally, not in all cases, but there hopefully is the motivation and the incentive to do the right thing because it's the right thing, because you care about people and you want to do the right thing and you want fairness and justice and all those things. But even if you have an underlying reason that you don't care, you're not a caring person, but you have the incentive of self-preservation and your own business, your own career, whatever the case might be. And so you do the right thing for business reasons. And so I even thought, why is he doing this? Even if his heart's not in it, he's got to know this is a stupid thing to do. Well, I hadn't read the article yet. I was going by the headline that he disbanded this committee. And who knows how many people, because we know people in this day and age especially are lazy and just read headlines, and that's where they are on this.
And I just want to say this, and to be very clear, this is it's an old guy on Twitter that made this comment, but this is proof that anybody who wants to say that there aren't people out there who are not probably don't have the right viewpoint in life on a lot of things. This is proof of that. So after this news broke, this guy on Twitter, he says, "I will be blunt. This is all blank. Iowa boosters don't give a blank that a diversity committee even exists. If you don't believe me, ask the booster clubs via secret ballot. If one thinks racism is bad in Iowa City, then the players should go to school in Clemson or Athens." That type of attitude is still present with some people. Yeah. So you can't act like, well, there aren't people out there who, I'm not going to call this guy racist or whatever, but you can't act like everybody's inclusive. It's an issue that obviously needs to be addressed, but based on, to summarize all of this, Mark, based upon Kirk Ferentz's recent actions, there are no recent actions by Kirk Ferentz that would tell me that he is not taking the issue seriously. So I don't even know why it really has to be a huge headline. But unfortunately, like you brought out, it was, because I think it was a poor choice in words.
Welcome to Iowa Hawkeyes Live right here at the Voice of College Football. And we post content just about every day on Iowa football, coming, of course, off a Western Division championship trip to the Big Ten championship game in a Citrus Bowl. So most things positive in this program and on the field. But, of course, we analyze it with Corey here each and every week. We would like everyone to head on over to From the Hawkeye of the Storm as well and subscribe there for Iowa football and basketball coverage right there with Corey.
Yep, tomorrow night we got a post-game show. Iowa, who do they play tomorrow night? Rutgers. Big game for Iowa. Iowa's won 3 of 4 and chance to win its second straight on the road. And they're even now in the Big Ten. I think maybe not the last time we talked, Mark, but at one point they were 0-2, and now they're 3-3, right on track of where they need to be for the tournament. So I know they were the latest projections. I was actually surprised. I was projected to be a 7 seed. I know it's way too early to be doing that. I do find it interesting when Joe Lunardi comes out with his bracketology in like November. So we can start paying attention to that. But yeah, we'll be on for our post-game show tomorrow, live after the Iowa Rutgers game.
Very good. I am in the process of starting a series on the main channel that will touch some Iowa football, in that I am analyzing the results from the 2021 season and with a determination on ranking the conferences. I've done it in a different way. I'll explain this system very quickly, Corey, just to get your feedback. So in the past, what I did was I just wanted to, I thought it would be a little too messy to include the group of 5. So I was looking at the results between all the Power 5 conferences just against each other, including Notre Dame. And I wasn't just saying, okay, the Big Ten went 10-6 in all its non-conference games and bowl games, and the ACC, let's say, for example, went 5-11. Therefore, the Big Ten has to be better than the ACC. But trying to put those results into context, because if Iowa goes out as, let's say, the 4th seed in the Big Ten and they beat Oklahoma, who in a particular season could be the 1 seed in the Big 12, that should be weighted more heavily than if Iowa beat Texas Tech, the 10th seed in the Big 12. And so I gave weights to each game that was completely mathematically accurate based on 14, 12, and 10 team conferences. So that's how I did it in the past, but it did not take into account the group of 5, which a conference could play well against a Power 5 and not as well against a group of 5, let's say. So it wasn't all inclusive. What I've taken on this year, since I've done a 1 through 130 rankings, and I am the first to admit, I'm taking a lot of the objective element out of it and making it subjective based on my rankings, but I am weighting all the games based on those rankings, and now I'm ranking the conferences with all the results included.
And Mark, I have to ask you, because you sent me a message about the Pac-12 the other night. I'm just curious, is there a group of 5 that's better than the Pac-12 right now, just based off of apples to apples comparisons?
Well, since I'm taking this approach this year, I'm going to rank and I'm going to review all the results for all the conferences. And I do expect the American Conference and the Mountain West to be close, if not surpassing the Pac-12.
That's just insane. I mean, I can't imagine that continuing next year. I mean, I just can't imagine it continuing.
Well, think of this, just off the top of our heads, that the Pac-12 went 2-16 against the Power 5, Notre Dame and BYU. Well, shoot, Cincinnati beat Notre Dame and Indiana by themselves. So they have 2 wins against the Power 5 by themselves. Tack on Houston with a win against Auburn. There you go. They've already trumped the Pac-12 with 2 teams in the American Conference.
Well, but the Big Ten is involved in an alliance with 2 of the 2 worst Power 5 conferences in the country. Now, maybe the Big 12, just the top of your head, Mark, would you say the Big 12 by losing Oklahoma and Texas to the SEC, again adding BYU, Houston, Central Florida, and who am I missing? Cincinnati. Is the Big 12 better than the ACC and the Pac-12? With those ads?
If those moves were made this season, I believe that the Big 12 would still be better than the Pac-12.
Okay, because that's the thing. Right now, you can argue that the Big 10 is involved in an alliance with, I mean, honestly, we thought, I mean, I'm not saying that this is a fact, because I still think there's a lot more talent. I'd have to think. I mean, I don't have the talent rankings in front of me, but I'd have to think from a recruiting standpoint that the Pac-12 and the ACC have recruited much better than the new Big 12, including Houston, Central Florida. Yes. I would have to think.
Yes.
So, but that's an interesting conversation because, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I know that you're not as much of a believer in the recruiting rankings as I am. And I'm sure
that's because I'm an Iowa fan.
and I'm sure that the truth lies somewhere in between.
Yeah.
But this is to back up your claim, is that it's clear to see that Cincinnati was better than anyone in the Pac-12, except maybe Utah. Who knows who would win a game between those 2 teams? But obviously they performed better against their schedule. But I got to think that I looked at Cincinnati's recruiting rankings. They were number 54 in the talent ranking. So their roster's 54th in the nation. The Pac-12, at least 8, if not 9, 10 of those schools have to be higher than 54th in the nation in talent rankings.
Yeah. So again, to think back when the news broke that Oklahoma and Texas were moving on, and then the alliance, was announced. It's sort of, the Big Ten doesn't great with these announcements. Remember the legends and leaders announcement. Anyways, so when that was announced, we kind of perceived the Big 12 as being left behind. Maybe they have been left behind in a way, but I will give them credit that by adding those schools and with what the ACC and Pac-12 have done over the past calendar year in football, I don't know that they have been left behind. And if I'm the Big Ten, I'm looking at this thinking maybe we should have aligned with the Big 12 on this, because let's be honest, if there's anybody who's mad at the SEC, it's the Big 12. And you and I both know that I know you feel the SEC is better, and you're probably right. But the Big Ten is the only real threat to the SEC. So you would think the Big 12, might have been a good candidate to form this alliance. So my question is, Mark, is there a chance that, I don't know the ins and outs of this, but is there a chance that that 3-conference alliance could add the Big 12?
Oh, sure.
So if that happens, that might be the only thing that could. I don't know. First of all, this alliance. What can you just put it in layman's terms? What the alliance actually is, besides we're going to play each other?
I got to say, I did a number of videos on it at the time, and I had my thoughts about trying to see it as legit, but then also poking holes and scoffing at it as some kind of flimsy facade of something that's going to be counteractive, a bit of a counter to what the SEC did through expansion. Yeah. And the only conclusion I can come to of where this alliance is anything real, substantive, would be that they would be forming some type of, and they alluded to this, but they of course were vague, of forming a scheduling alliance. So for example, if I'm the Big Ten, the ACC, and the Pac-12, and at the time the Big 12 was kind of in limbo, my thought is we can shut off the SEC from a non-conference scheduling standpoint, and we have enough attractive matchups that are going to be interesting to the nation, and we're going to force the SEC. If we're really playing hardball here, we can force the SEC to have no one to play in non-conference play, and we'll see in the playoffs. We'll see in postseason play, and we're going to shut you off, and you've got no one to play to provide and deliver attractive games in non-conference play in September.
And correct me if I'm wrong, not to change the subject, but the ACC has pushed back on expansion recently.
Yes.
Is that so? All of the, which doesn't make any sense. You call this the alliance, and yet there isn't a single individual that's representing the 3 conferences. They're still individually represented, Mark.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know. And to have, there's not much of an alliance when you have the ACC feeling one way. And I'm assuming that the Big Ten, I don't know what went on in those meetings here recently, but I'm assuming the Pac-12 and the Big Ten want expansion.
So the Pac-12 initially had an issue with the way the conference champions were selected. I may have touched upon this last week. Instead of having the top 6 ranked conference champions selected, excuse me, they wanted the Power 5 protected, because I think they see their decline, and they want to make sure that their champions protected. So there was some squabbling back and forth about that. The Big Ten initially seemed supportive of the playoff proposal, but I don't know. I'm hearing that they're also pushing back and stalling to a certain extent. Now, what that's all about, I don't know, because if there's a conference that benefits from a 12-team playoff, it's the Big Ten.
Why?
Just based on recent
rankings,
season's results, in that, the SEC places the most teams in the top 4, but if you expand it past there, that the Big Ten has a thicker upper echelon that would flood a 12-team play. I didn't say flood a 12-team playoff, but be represented
Three
more
teams.
so than any other conference except maybe the SEC.
I was going to say the SEC still had, Ole Miss would have been in this year. Alabama and Georgia, there's 3 right there. So is there somebody else that would from the SEC that would have been the top, that finished in the top 12 this year? But the Big Ten would have had Ohio State, Michigan, and Michigan State. Were they in the top 12 to finish before the bowl games, I guess?
I believe so.
Okay. So, yeah, I just don't. I said this to Don Patterson here, a week ago. I think it's so ridiculous that this is taking so long. I mean, to me, it's. And I understand there are details, things that need to be ironed out, and there can be disagreements. But the fact that we have to keep pushing this off by months, Mark, if you had to predict right now, when will the first expanded playoff take place? Will it be this coming season?
No.
No way on earth. Because you and I know where there's a will, there's a way on this stuff.
No.
But you're thinking there's no way that it happens this year.
No.
That's disgraceful. Why can't we make it happen? Why do we
it could happen. We just came through a pandemic year in which games were scheduled 2 days before they were played. Now, of course, the playoff is a lot larger with a lot more moving parts, but at the same time, it could be scheduled during an off season and it all could work. It could be scheduled. If you really want to talk about it, I can think of Major League Baseball making changes mid-season. That's not the smartest thing to do, but you have time. It could be ready for 2022. It's not. I was going to say 25.
We got 25.
That's
We've got freaking 8 months here, Mark. 8 months.
All you're doing is adding teams and setting up a bracket and determining.
I'm just confused as to why these are and I've heard you're not the first person who said that. And I know you're not endorsing it not happening until 25 or 26, but Gary Lewis says 26 is the realistic estimated season.
Yeah.
I just don't understand why. What are we missing? What am I missing?
Lawyers have to get involved.
How long did it take to expand to 4? How long were those conversations taking place? Well, that was actually a reformat. It wasn't even an expansion. That was just a reformat. So when did that? How long were those conversations?
That was an expansion.
Well, but it was a different format, though, Mark.
Or it was a formation. It wasn't an expansion. It was a creation of the playoff.
You would think that would be harder to do, right?
Yeah.
To create as opposed to expand.
Yeah.
And I don't believe that took 4 years, did it?
No.
As I recall, that was pretty quick, right?
Yes.
So,
yes.
I just think it's ridiculous. I think I can speak on behalf of Iowa fans who would also very much benefit from a 12-team playoff because Iowa would have they've won 10 games now, 2 of the last 3 years. They'd be in that conversation.
And the other season probably would have.
Potentially.
So, you and I, as long as you get the various factions to agree on what the playoff is going to be, once it's agreed upon,
contracts can be amended.
Book stadiums.
Yeah.
And if for some reason the Superdome's not open, then you switch to the Rose. You've got plenty of options.
But I see this comment from Gary that it has to do with TV rights and
it
whatnot.
does.
Sure. But again, I keep saying it, where there's a will, there's a way. Like Oklahoma and Texas were penciled in for the Big 12 till what, 25? Am I correct? And are they joining this year?
That has yet to be determined.
But there's a chance. There's a chance that happens.
I don't think they will this year. I think it's going to be another year.
But Mark, if that were to happen, then schedules get completely revamped. And the Big Ten just revamped.
Yeah, you don't have to change anybody's schedules with a playoff.
Yeah, this isn't hard. You don't even have to. Listen, we've got how many bowl games? 6 bowl games, right? New Year's 6 bowl games.
Yeah.
So you don't have to add any.
No.
You don't have to add any bowl games.
Yeah. So everything I just stated about booking stadiums, throw that out the door because, they're already booked.
You and I both know that whoever the non-playoff stadiums are this year, and those sponsors, they'd love to just make those games semifinal games because you wouldn't have Chris Olave and those guys opting out of the Rose Bowl then. That's just not going to happen.
So to answer Gary's comment, I think it was Gary that made the comment about TV rights. All that needs to be done, and I'm making this very simplistic, and again, it involves money and lawyers in terms of getting the two parties together. But it's ESPN owning the rights through like 2025 or 26. So they already own the rights. They would love to have an expanded playoff. They get more games, sure. Then you require them to pay more money, but it may be some reduced cost, whatever, it could be worked out there. So the rights aren't an issue. They own the rights.
Yeah. Like I say, it's not that hard. I mean, it is, but it isn't. It's not that hard to amend contracts, especially when we're dealing with a situation where everybody's going to benefit from this. Who's not going to benefit from it, Mark? Besides maybe Alabama and maybe three schools, right? Alabama, Clemson, Georgia would probably be the three schools you could argue don't really benefit from an expanded playoff. Is that fair?
Well, if you're going to include Clemson, why not Ohio State or Oklahoma? But yeah, to your point, whatever the number, 2 to 5 schools.
So, and again, I understand that those are Alabama's probably the most powerful school in the SEC. Ohio State is certainly the most powerful in the Big Ten. But I just, you'd have to think again, where there's a will, there's a way with this. And I just wonder, Mark, will there be, because nobody expected the Oklahoma Texas news this past offseason. I know we're not talking about Iowa here for a second, but will there be more expansion this offseason? I'm not talking about, movement. We always have movement, right, between smaller group of 5 conferences, but I'm talking about significant expansion that maybe we don't expect.
Well, the Big 12 took care of itself. So I don't foresee that, but
is there any way the Big Ten has, like again, this alliance? I don't know what it means. So, is there any way like the Big 12, or excuse me, the Big Ten adds a Big 12 school out of nowhere? Would that be it? Would that go against the alliance? Would that be it?
Well, yeah. There was all sorts of crazy rumors prior to the alliance being announced that the Big Ten was going to pick off. Shoot, I heard crazy things about Oregon and USC and UCLA, and so if you're in an alliance with 2 other conferences, I think it's understood that you're not going to be poaching teams or programs.
Okay, so final thing before we finish this show up, Mark. And I know some people I got criticized on YouTube this past week because I've been beating a dead horse as it relates to quarterback. So I've tried not to bring that up during the show tonight. But I should mention this. Iowa did miss on Nate Pete, who is one of the 2. I want to call him workhorse backs, but one of the 2 rotational backs at Stanford. Iowa had offered him in the portal, and he just committed to Missouri. So I'm a little surprised Iowa's been going after a running back at that. But to me, now again, they've shown that they are willing to do that with Mekhi Sargent and James Butler from Nevada. They've had success doing it, but I am a bit surprised that, with Gavin Williams and LaShawn Williams performing as well as they did against Kentucky, that they were feeling that was a need. But they are young at that position. There's no question about it. But they miss on Pete. For anybody who's curious about the portal, Virginia Tech's Braxton Burmeister just committed to San Diego State. Kid from Texas Tech. Let me find that. Harrison Bailey from Tennessee. He committed to UNLV, Mark. We had talked about him. And then South Florida's, is it Cade Fortin? I don't know how you pronounce his last name. He's going to Arkansas.
Yeah.
And Henry Colombi, the kid from Texas Tech, is headed to Marshall, where Grant Wells, of course, he left and he's headed to West Virginia. So my count here, now just bring this up. My count here for quarterbacks, transfer portal quarterbacks, is Nebraska has nabbed 2 pretty big names. Now, Chuba Purdy didn't do much at Florida State. We can agree with that, right? He
Yeah,
didn't do
let's
much.
not call him a big name.
But there's no question about it that they nabbed a kid who, I mean, I would have probably been happy if Iowa could have gotten Purdy just to push who Iowa has in the room, and maybe he wins the job. I don't know. But they grabbed Purdy and they grabbed Thompson. So they grabbed two. You've got Auburn that grabbed Calzada. And then who did they just land today, Mark?
Shoot.
Auburn
did they
just
land today?
I'm going to find it here. Robbie Ashford.
Yeah.
From Oregon.
Baseball player. Yeah.
But they nabbed Calzada and Ashford. So, you know, first of all, it's not happening. We know that it's not. Iowa's not going for a portal quarterback. The news did break out from the Register reported this last week. Alex Padilla's dad apparently talked to the Register. I'm sure it was, you know, really in-depth reporting. I'm sure it was a direct message on Twitter that was sent to Alex Padilla's father, who confirmed that Alex Padilla is not going anywhere right now. And it was presented as like this breaking news story. Alex Padilla returning. I found it kind of funny. But he is coming back for the spring. But here's the deal. Mark, you and I both know if Alex Padilla comes back and it's apparent to him that he's not gaining ground on Spencer Petras, at least not in the coaches' minds, there's no guarantee he's going to come back after the spring. Like, he could leave in the spring, and then Iowa's down to Labus and Petras, and then Carson Mayhew will be enrolling in the fall, but will probably be here this summer. So anyways, just find it kind of interesting. The quarterbacks are picked over. Tyson Fumichan, there's the question from Erica. Tyson Fumichan is still available, Mark, but there's not, again, it doesn't matter. Like, it's not happening. So we can talk about it all we want. It's just, you know, it's just not happening. So
I don't get it. Caleb Williams is still out there.
Here, I'd like to be able to stay composed for the last couple minutes of the show, Mark. Don't make me get into a laughing fit. So Caleb Williams, Jackson Dart, they're still available, right?
Jackson Dart.
So let's just be real. So who is still available? Tyson Fumichan, Jackson Dart, Caleb Williams. Is there somebody else that I'm missing out there? I know that Jack Plummer from Purdue, rumor had it he was headed to Purdue, or excuse me, to Cal. I've never heard anything official on that. I'm assuming he is, but I don't think he's announced that formally. Is there anybody else that I'm missing that is a significant name?
I can't think of anyone.
Iowa has made it very clear, though, Mark, that they're not going to the portal. They've made that clear. They basically, without saying it, they've made that statement that in a year where there's more quarterbacks in the portal than ever, it's obvious that's not an interest at all from Iowa. You know, so and I had somebody that reached out, and I think it was this morning or yesterday or something, said, you know, Iowa can't, a portal quarterback will not work here. A mobile quarterback will not work here unless the scheme changes. I think that was Kevin, one of our loyal listeners. But Mark, Brad Banks would have something to say about that, because Brad Banks is more mobile than anybody Iowa has on the roster. But that scheme did not change in 2002. It was just a very good fit. And he didn't run a lot. You know, we're not looking for a guy who's going to be, again, a Kyler Murray, but Brad Banks and Russell Wilson are perfect examples that you can be mobile in a pro-style system that involves a lot of I formation run plays. So, you know, JT Daniels, that's the other one that I missed. Yeah. JT Daniels just entered. So it's just not happening. But just thought we'd bring that up just to tickle the ears of Iowa fans who are on here.
What would your response be? I would love to see your response and us to do a show after Iowa signed JT Daniels.
Jeez. What was it? Can we slide back up in the chat? Let me see if I can find this comment from one of our loyal listeners, and I want you to say his name. Mark, can you say his name and read the comment for our listeners?
You had to give me that one before I put my glasses on, right? Dr. Nigel Pisswater.
Okay, can you read the comment from Dr. Pisswater for us, please?
The good news is Iowa has picked up JT Daniels, Georgia quarterback, in the transfer portal. He reports that as news here.
You know, it's funny because Dr. Pisswater commented on a video here a few days ago and brought up JT Daniels, and he said, can Iowa get JT Daniels? And I said, no. And he said, well, why can't we have nice things? I said, because we can't. That's all there is to it. We can't have, I mean, that's just, Mark, if you had to put a percentage chance on Iowa's chances of getting, I'm not saying if they went for him. I'm saying you tell me if the percentage chance that JT Daniels or Caleb Williams or Jackson Dart, any of those three end up coming to Iowa. Give me a percentage based on what you know and what you've seen these last few weeks.
Well, I would hate to put 0% on anything because anything's possible.
but it is zero. It is 0%.
1%. I'll go 1% because if they haven't gone after anyone yet, JT Daniels would fit the offense better than Caleb Williams. So he is a prototypical Iowa quarterback or recent Iowa quarterback. So
I'll tell you the scenario where Iowa would even pursue somebody in the portal at this point. Alex Padilla's girlfriend would have to move to like Hawaii and say, you either move out here and transfer to Hawaii or we're done. Spencer Petras would have to get some, I don't even know what would, I think Spencer Petras is so married to this program. And I think, and I don't mean that in a necessarily a bad way, but
yeah,
Spencer Petras is so married to this program. I think Kirk Ferentz is so married to Spencer Petras. That's why I will be very surprised if Alex Padilla wins this job. I know a lot of people want that to happen. I mean, I've advocated for that. I think he's the better of the two options, in my opinion. And I think you can make the claim either way, Mark. You can make the claim that Petras was a little bit better. I mean, I don't agree with that, but I think you can make the claim because there wasn't this big gap either way. But I don't, unless Padilla and Petras somehow leave before the spring, which isn't going to happen, there is no chance that Iowa goes after a big name at quarterback. And I'm so done. You know, somebody went after me yesterday on YouTube for beating a dead horse on this issue. And I kind of almost replied to him. I said, you know, thank you for acknowledging that because I'm tired of it too. I mean, I'm just tired of talking about it because it's such a ridiculous thing. I mean, some of our listeners here, the 70 people we have on right now, probably remember, if they follow my channel, From the Hawkeye of the Storm, you probably remember I did a live show a couple of weeks ago that was literally, it was the whole premise of that show, Mark, was Iowa and the transfer portal at quarterback. We did a whole show on this stuff. And to know in hindsight, and not that I didn't have an idea, that hindsight, it didn't do anything. It didn't mean anything because they never really interested at quarterback.
Well, we should be doing full shows on this. We talk college football all the time.
Yeah.
And this is important. And one question needs to be asked of Kirk Ferentz. And that question is, isn't it your job as the head football coach to go to whatever lengths within the rules to improve your football team?
I think there's a chance, and I don't know this because I did, by the way, I will say this. I did request an interview with Kirk. I've never done that before. I did recently request, and I'm sure now with Kirk, these issues, he's probably not going to, he doesn't do interviews with the mainstream Iowa media, but very often, but I did request that. So hopefully get him on the show at some point. I hope be great. But that would be I think there's a chance that Kirk Ferentz really does believe that Spencer Petras is the best option for this Iowa offense, that he's sort of the ideal quarterback for this Iowa offense. And I think part of it, my speculation is, I don't have this on a good source or anything like that, but I would not be shocked if part of it is, even though Spencer struggles and has struggled doing even the basic functions of that a Big Ten quarterback has to pull off, I think Kirk is comfortable with someone who he feels is a less risky choice, a guy who's not going to throw a lot of picks, who's not going to run and then fumble the ball. And we'd rather we would rather run on 2nd and 30 twice in a row to be able to get in better field position than have a guy who's capable of converting a 2nd and long, 2nd and 20. And I don't know. I'm not saying that Kirk Ferentz would ever admit to that, but I just think almost psychologically, perhaps that's going on because he does really seem to like Spencer Petras. And it's got nothing to do with his character. I've said it before, Mark. We've talked about it many times. I think Spencer Petras seems like a really nice person, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's the best guy for the job. So I don't know. I'd love to hear from Kirk on that, honestly.
Well, to answer your question about whether Spencer Petras is the best quarterback to run the Iowa offense, yes, he is the best quarterback to run the 90th best offense in the country.
Well, can I just, before I went over this with Don, but anybody who's on here that missed our show with Don Patterson on Sunday, I just want to read through these. This can kind of be the final thing we do here,
Sure.
Mark. I want to read through the, let's see here, the final rankings for Iowa's offense. Okay. These are after the bowl game was compiled, right? Total offense remember, this is out of 130 teams. Total offense, 121. Rushing offense, 102. Passing offense, 109. Passing efficiency, 117th. Third down percentage, 110th. Fourth down percentage, 125th. Red zone offense, 122nd. First downs, 104. And actually improved. Sacks allowed, 68. So that is right there. That last stat, Mark, should really be an eye-opener for people, because a lot of people have said that Iowa is fine at quarterback. It's the offensive line. That's the sole that I've had a couple people who have swore by what they view as a fact that Iowa cannot really improve the offense. Even if they go get a quarterback, they will not improve unless that O-line gets better. And that is, without any doubt, false. That's 100% incorrect, Mark. You can't make that. You cannot logically make that claim. Now, you can say it will never be elite unless the O-line gets better, but to say it will not improve. You're saying there's not a quarterback out there that's better than Spencer Petras and Alex Padilla, or you're saying that they're even the quarterbacks that are better than what Iowa currently has, that they can't produce any better than these two guys with this offensive line? I don't believe that. And I do believe the offensive line will get better, for the record. I don't know how much better. I believe it will get better, even with Tyler Linderbaum leaving, which we haven't talked about yet. I know that's recent news. But the fact that Iowa actually went up by 19 spots in the FBS rankings in sacks allowed in one game. Now, of course, you have to weigh all the bowl games were a factor, but that says right there, there wasn't pressure on Spencer Petras all day in that Citrus Bowl, Mark. They went up 19 spots off of one performance. They're 68th in the country in sacks allowed, which isn't great, but that's not terrible when you look at the rest of the offense. So the offensive line blocked well for Petras during the Citrus Bowl. Mark, did it result in better offensive play? Besides the running game. The running game looked better, but again, that's got nothing to do with Spencer Petras or Alex Padilla. Did the passing game look better, in your opinion?
No.
It looked the exact same. It's looked all year. I mean, it just looked the exact same. I don't care if Petras has taken sacks or not. It looked the exact same. So don't tell me that better quarterback play would not help Iowa's offense unless the offensive line gets better, because I saw some significant improvement from that offensive line during bowl prep, because we saw it on the field in Orlando on January 1st, and certainly will help, but that's not, as I've said over and over again, multiple issues require multiple solutions. But at the same time, I said it on my podcast this week, Mark, it's clear that Alex Padilla, Spencer Petras, and Joey Labas are the guys in the spring. So as Iowa fans, I'm not going to sit here and hate on them. I'm an Iowa guy. I'm not trying to sound like I'm just a bitter fan. So at this point, Mark, what else can I do but hope for the best and root for these guys? I don't want to see anybody fail, because it's obvious that there aren't going to be the changes that I would prefer, and that I'm not the coach. I don't have the power to make those changes. But all you can do now as a fan, even if you're upset by the decision making from the Iowa staff and recruiting people, just root for these guys who are on the roster. Root for Petras, root for Labas, root for Padilla. I think I have no reason to think all three of them aren't great people. So I wish all of them success, and especially when they're here at Iowa. Now, I will say, hold on a second. This comment from Erica, I have a problem with this comment, though, too, Erica. When you say the QB is the issue, I don't agree with that either. It's not the only issue, right, Mark? Am I going too far with this? It's not the only issue. Offensive line is an issue, and I understand what she's saying here, because she's upset about the quarterback situation, like a lot of people are. But I'm seeing it from both sides. There's not one issue. I do happen to think that quarterback and offensive line are basically 1A and 1B. And then maybe, play calling schematics might be 2A and 2B, But there are multiple issues, and I think there are some you're not going to produce these types of offensive rankings unless there are a number of issues. Is that fair, Mark? You're just not going to.
Yeah, because every offense in the country has deficiencies. But this one is not exceptional in any one unit on offense, and it's well below par in two of the four units, including receivers and running backs, into that 4 components.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to pick on Eric here. I do see, as she said in the second part of her comment, the biggest issue is the fact that the coaches refuse to do anything about it. But I'm just saying that there also are issues away from the quarterback position completely. I still think stubbornness defensively, even though the defense was really elite, Mark, and it's been elite for quite a while. The Purdue game is a perfect example of some stubbornness that needs to be uprooted from the defensive philosophy. And that's on Phil Parker, who is one of the best. He's one of the best defensive coordinators in the country, in my opinion. But that's still something he can get better at. He's not infallible. That's something that certainly I'm hoping he's looking at this offseason saying, good Lord, we got to figure out why we can't defend Purdue's receivers.
Absolutely. Keep pounding that drum.
And Hugo Maine, just for the record, I see this comment here. They could use a receiver over 6 feet. They do have Jacob Bostic coming in as a freshman. He won't be enrolling early, but he'll be here this fall. He's, I think, 6'2", really thin guy. He's going to have to bulk up. Hopefully can do that. Right? We've seen skinny receivers. Amir Smith-Marset is a perfect example of a guy who was over 6 feet tall and never really got real big, bulky physically. If I've heard people say that, I've even made that comment to Don at times. Perhaps they need a little bit more size on the outside, because trying to run a couple guys who are under 6 foot in Reganey and Tracy and then Arlen Bruce, who's like 5'9", your one guy that has the ability to catch over someone is Keegan Johnson. He's only maybe 6'1". So yeah, maybe they get Jacob Bostic to step into a role and be a role receiver. And I'm assuming the rest of those guys, the good news is, another thing we didn't talk about, Mark, Charlie Jones is coming back. That helps. He's a playmaker, and I think he has the ability, if Iowa can get receivers more involved. That's another big thing. They got to get receivers more involved. They can do that. They've got weapons now. Keegan Johnson and Arlen Bruce will be a year older. They've got Reganey, who's experienced, who's a veteran. And then you've got a dynamic Charlie Jones. I think they have a good mix of receivers right there, just those top 4.
All right, folks, as Corey mentioned a few minutes ago, this is the off season, and so we certainly are speaking to our core and our diehards and our football faithfuls here at the Voice of College Football. So please, if any of you, whether you're watching us live or will be watching us on the taped segment that'll post afterwards, are not subscribed either here or at the From the Hawkeye of the Storm, Corey's channel. Again, From the Hawkeye of the Storm, you see it on the banner there. Please head on over there for Iowa football and basketball coverage. And if you have people in your family, friends, acquaintances on social media that love Iowa football, or just college football fans, as you can see, there are all sorts of fan bases represented in the live chat. Please bring them in here every Tuesday. That's at 5:30 Eastern, 4:30, where it's most important, Central Time.
And Mark, we have just a few more than 100 people left until we get to 1,000 subscribers on my channel here. You see on the banner, From the Hawkeye of the Storm. So if you know somebody who hasn't subscribed, or you have another YouTube channel, it would help a lot if you go over and subscribe. Help us get that number up to 1,000 like you did with this channel.
Absolutely. Corey, thank you so much. We will convene next Tuesday at 4:30 Central Time.
Thanks, Mark.